Well, today certainly was an interesting day. The president just got done with his latest press conference detailing the U.S.'s response to the Wu flu, also known by some as the coronavirus, but of course that's a non-specific term. There's lots of coronaviruses. SARS and MERS are coronaviruses, so specifically we want to call this the Wu flu so people know that we're talking about the virus from Wuhan. So today the president went over a bunch of measures, which actually are I'm glad that they're coming because they're things that should have been done already. They're working on a response to get more people tested. The FDA has expedited the approval of a Wu flu test by a company called named Roche, I guess. I assume that's spelled Rosch. And they will hopefully be mass producing this by next week. And then also they're going to be rolling out a system similar to South Korea where you have these essentially trailers and parking lots where people can go drive through in their car, get tested by someone who's waiting there for them, and then they can get the test results back within however much time that takes. I think that the time will be a lot shorter because these tests that are that are going to be produced now are the kinds of tests that can be processed not just by the CDC in Atlanta but by local hospitals. And so we will have a system now for people going to get tested. Now, I was feeling pretty good about this, saying, hey, this is the kinds of stuff that we'd want to see, because if you're going to contain this, you need to identify everyone who's sick as quickly as possible, so that you can quarantine them and then track down everyone that they've talked to, recently and had contact with, and try and quarantine those people so that you stop the spread of it. Unfortunately, the way that this works, the way that this looks. I am not necessarily optimistic about the effectiveness of the way that this is being implemented. And the reason for that is that a woman who was up there during the press conference, President Trump brought her in front to speak, to do her part. There were lots of people there, lots of CEOs of companies that I guess are partnering to help with this. Like I guess Walmart parking lots are going to be made available, for these testing centers. And you can't just drive up without an appointment. I guess you have to go on some website that's being built by Google. It's actually kind of funny. A side note here: President Trump said that Google's building this site and it's going to be done, much better and faster than certain other websites. And I assume he was referring to healthcare.gov and the whole controversy over the rather disastrous rollout of that during the Obama administration, to which it came out and didn't really work right, and took it took a while to get the kinks out of the website. Trump is confident that his Wu flu website is going to be the best website ever built. And so the woman came out, with previewing what the website's going to be like with a flow chart, basically, saying that, hey, you're going to need to input some information, and then, the website will tell you either, you don't need to be tested or you should be tested, and then here's where you go to get that test done, and, you have a time to go by, and you can get it done. It seemed very smooth. But if you look at the flow chart, the first question on the flow chart is, are you symptomatic? And if you say yes, well, then you go through all these other steps, answer other questions, and eventually, it tells you to go get tested. If you're not symptomatic, it just says no, and that's the end of the flowchart, meaning you're not going to get a test. So if you're not testing people who are asymptomatic, you're not going to stop the spread of this, because people, from what we've seen from the data we have, are contagious before they show symptoms. And so if nobody's going to be tested, and therefore nobody's going to be quarantined until after they're symptomatic, well, first of all, not everybody who gets this even is ever symptomatic. So you're going to be quarantining not everyone, who gets it. And more than that, like I said, even the people who are eventually, develop symptoms are going to be spreading it until they get, develop symptoms. So this is not going to be a way of containing this at all. It should be, hey, have you had close contact with a known patient, with someone who is, who has the Wu flu? And if the answer is yes to that, even if you're not symptomatic, you need to be tested. Now, this was just, a board. This isn't the, necessarily an official document. We haven't seen the website yet. Perhaps by the time that this gets up and running, they will be testing asymptomatic people. But the way that it was presented at this press conference, it did not look that way, which is a very big problem. Now, this press conference was scheduled to start at 3 o'clock today, right, in time for the last hour of trading in the day. And, of course, stocks were already up going into this. We're having a bit of a rebound today off of yesterday's disastrous close. But for most of the day, the market struggled to stay, not necessarily to stay green, but to keep making gains. And all day, as soon as the market opened, people sold the rally, and the market never really got back to the opening price. It was pretty much down all day, but it gapped up so high that it was still green. And I started to think, because President Trump's presser was so far delayed that perhaps he wouldn't be able to get in time to give us the good news and pump up the market. But then lo and behold, I think about 20 minutes maybe before the markets closed, he came on, and that was enough time for him to juice markets higher and make highs on the day to get even higher than the opening price. So the S&P, I think, shot up maybe 100 points in the time that he was talking. And so we finally ended up closing about 7 points up. And that's after yesterday closing, 9.5 points down. So still red over the course of those 2 days. But hey, you have to start your relief rally somewhere. And a 7-point move up. I mean, this is still one of the biggest percentage moves in I believe since the 2008 crisis. I believe that was the last time that you saw a rally this high in a single day. But considering that there's been so much pessimism and that the market was already positioned for a bit of a rebound, technically speaking, because again, this is how bear markets work. This is it's also how bull markets work. There's an ebb and flow to whatever the trend is. Even though now I think it's very clear that the trend is down. You're not going to go straight down every day. Actually, the speed at which we've fallen is completely unprecedented. I mean, this has been the most violent bear market in history, to my knowledge. And so it is, it is very reasonable for the market to have a few up days here and there. And there certainly was good news worth rallying off today. However, if you ask me, am I necessarily feeling better after all this? No, not really. But I was concerned about the Wu flu long before markets ever were. And so I certainly am not one to assume that they've priced in all available information because, if you're looking a little bit over the horizon here at what is sure to come, at what, is pretty much clear at this point is going to come, things as far as the Wu flu is concerned, we haven't turned the tide on this yet. We haven't rounded the bend. Things are going to get much worse. And I think that, they're going to get worse in a way that directly affects the stock market and traders on Wall Street. They're going to get directly hit by the looks of it because if you have been following what's been going on in not only the state of New York, but in New York City, the governor of New York has been doing daily updates on this for the last few days. He's been sounding very grim, trying to condition people to understand that things are going to get much worse in the state of New York. The mayor of New York is now also doing the same, Bill de Blasio, and he gave a very spooky presser yesterday in which he was pretty much he was asked directly, hey, are the kinds of quarantines that we saw in China and Italy on the table? Could we expect, is that possible to see in the next few days? And he did not answer. Which is a nice way of saying yes, pretty much. He didn't say no. If they were not considering full quarantines like that in New York City, which again, a major economic hub for the United States and the world. A lot of commerce goes on in New York City. The mayor should have been able to just say no if he wasn't considering that, but instead he said we're considering all options. We're looking at all models, meaning the Italian and the Chinese model. And so, while Wall Street, may be able to keep trading online through the internet, they can use their Robinhood accounts too, I guess. Of course, Bloomberg terminals also will work. The New York Stock Exchange pretty soon is probably going to be closed. All of Wall Street pretty soon is probably going to be closed, and because nobody in New York is going to be able to go anywhere. It's going to be a ghost town. Right now, they've got a quarantine area already in New Rochelle, which is sort of a test run for how they would do this, over the rest of the city. There are, a lot of people right now who are making the case, and again, I don't have hard data to back this up, that New Rochelle is not necessarily any harder hit than other areas of New York City, but that they don't feel like they can roll out this kind of quarantine across the entire city, so they need to do it in stages. And so New Rochelle is just where they decided to start. And if you look at, what New Rochelle looks like right now, it's a ghost town. Because people are being quarantined. They're not leaving their houses. Nobody's going to work. If you've got a restaurant, nobody's coming to eat at your restaurant. You're not, showing up to open the doors. And so once you have, one of the most important, the cities in the world with the biggest economy, a city with an economy that's bigger than, most countries in the world probably, you're going to see quite a shock to the system once that closes down. And, de Blasio is not talking about like the Chinese saying, oh, well, we have to wait till April. We'll see. We're going to take a break with things till April. A lot of the, he's saying 6 months is the term that is the timetable he's looking at for all these things. He's saying, hey, Madison Square Garden is going to be canceled, for at least 6 months. And that's, don't think that they're going to stop at the stadiums and stuff like that. They're not going to stop with Radio City Music Hall. They're not going to stop with Broadway. It's going to be the whole city, because if you can't have a Broadway show, how do you justify Grand Central Station? How do you justify keeping the subways open? I think that once these test kits get out into the wild and that, we finally start testing everyone who has this virus in America, or at least a lot of the people, and the numbers, spikes, I don't know if I will necessarily say exponentially, but it will certainly go through the roof. When our numbers become a little more accurate and reflect reality a little bit better, I think people are going to be much more scared than they are right now, which is not a good thing. I don't want people to be afraid. You shouldn't be fearful. You should be aware. You should be aware of the threat, be aware of the problem. But don't let fear control you, because, that you never make good decisions under those sorts of circumstances. But anyway, I think that will be the market's ultimate downfall. I think that any chance or any hope for a V-shaped recovery after this massive drop will be dead and gone once they close down New York City. And I don't know how long that's going to be. I mean, New York's already closed down their universities. That just happened yesterday or the day before. Oh, and before I forget, how could I leave out, one of the biggest risks probably that, again, would certainly wake up the folks on Wall Street to how serious the situation is. The possibility now, the distinct possibility that President Trump has, been infected with the virus. Now, President Trump, as some of you may understand, may remember, even though he is a rather spry man who's got a lot of energy, he is, over 70 years old now, and is certainly in the age group in which people do not fare well, as far as their chances are concerned when it comes to contracting these viruses. Now, how exactly did the president, get exposed to this? Because he hasn't been tested yet. And yes, as of yesterday, he said that, he sees no reason why he should be tested. Today, he said, I probably will be tested at the press conference. Very important change in language. I think that's smart. I think that, he has good reason to be tested because he came into contact with, the press secretary of Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, when he was in Washington, and they, posed for a picture together wearing "Make Brazil Great Again" hats. It was a nice photo op, pretty funny. I kind of want one of those hats. I think they look better than the MAGA hats, personally. But anyway, that man later tested positive for the Wu flu, that press secretary. And of course, since he's, Bolsonaro's press secretary, he's had plenty of contact, I'm sure, with Bolsonaro. So Bolsonaro's been tested, and so Fox News got an interview with one of Bolsonaro's sons and said, hey, did your dad test positive or negative? And the son said that his dad tested positive, meaning that Bolsonaro has the Wu flu too. Then the Brazilian government came out and denied that and said, no, that's fake news, and the rest of Bolsonaro's sons said that's fake news, and even the son that said it's fake news. But apparently he just came back and said, oops, I didn't mean to say that. I don't know how you mix that up. Sounds to me like Bolsonaro really does have the virus, and they're trying to cover it up. Again, for good reason. You don't want to scare the people in Brazil. Brazil's volatile enough. But, in case that there was, any doubt that Bolsonaro actually did contract this virus, the mayor of Miami, not the mayor of Miami-Dade, that's different, but the mayor of the city of Miami has just tested positive for the Wu flu, and he caught it from, guess who? Bolsonaro. That's how he contracted it. They traced back all his contacts, and the only person that he's had contact with in recent times, who might have given it to him, is Bolsonaro. So this press secretary, if he gave it to Bolsonaro, he probably gave it to Trump too. So Trump really needs to be tested. He certainly was exposed to the virus. We just don't know if it stuck, if it actually infiltrated his body and is, reproducing in there and is incubating in his body. We don't know that yet because he hasn't been tested. Oh, and by the way, this guy, the fact that he was, that he was able to get other people sick, and this guy wasn't symptomatic clearly, or else they wouldn't have let him anywhere near the president of the United States, I don't think. This seems like another example of asymptomatic spread, in case there were still anyone doubting that. And going back to my point earlier about how, if the U.S. is not going to be testing people who are asymptomatic, well, then you're not going to stop the spread of this, because those are the people who are spreading this. So what do you think the markets would do if it turns out that the sitting U.S. president, a president who's considered great for the stock market, a president whose election sparked a massive rally, if it turns out that he has this very deadly virus that is, very lethal for people in his age group, what do you think the market's going to do then? Because, as far as I'm concerned, even leaving all this stuff aside, if we're just looking at this as a normal, or as Milton Friedman would say, a garden variety recession, you would expect that the stock market would revert to the mean. That's what you see in recessions, is you see this excess going away, and you revert to the mean. Well, the mean, in terms of market cap to GDP, which is the measure of the size of the stock market relative to the size of the economy, you would think those two things would be pretty balanced and track closely to one another. The stock market should grow at a similar rate than the economy, because that's what you own. When you own stocks, you own shares in the companies that are acting in the economy. So you're kind of like owning shares of the economy. That's what stocks are. Stocks over the last few years have been rising significantly faster than the overall economy, because we've had very little economic growth and a lot of growth in the stock market. So market cap to GDP is at record highs, 158%. In 2000, previously, the biggest stock market bubble ever was in 2000. That was at 150%. So we were way overvalued even compared to 2000. So, what's a normal mean where you would think that it would revert back to? Well, if you look at, the 80s and 90s, somewhere between 50 and 75% market cap to GDP seems to be about normal. And in 2009, during that crash, the market bottomed at 50% market cap to GDP. So it would be reasonable in this case to expect, the stock market, just in a normal, reversion to the mean, to go to drop like 2/3, 66%. That would, that is within the very reasonable, not assumption, but a very reasonable outcome of all this. But if you couple in, the long-term disruptions to the supply chains, the potential that the president of the United States has contracted this novel virus, all these other things. Needless to say, we have a long way to go on the downside. There's a lot of downside risk here that has not yet been priced into this market. So I will, as always, keep an eye on this and see where it goes from here. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.